Okay. Florence, when you're ready.
Excellent. Well, welcome everybody. We are so excited to have you join us today for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub 2024 Student Research Symposium. This is a really cool idea that a student actually brought us a year or two ago and said, we wish that students had the opportunity to present their research as the principal investigators of their own research. And so we created the Student Research Symposium. So this is our second annual one. And we're super excited to have Emily Rothenberg, our National Student Data Corps Program Manager, monitoring and moderating this. Aditya Raj, who is one of our Columbia University graduate students who works at the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub, and all these incredible presenters from around the community. These presenters are winners of the National Student Data Corps Data Science Symposium from 2023 and the COVID Information Commons Student Paper Challenge. We are going to be announcing new challenges today too, so hang on tight and we hope that you'll participate. So today's agenda, we're going to do a brief overview of the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub. You may already be familiar with our programs, you may not. This might be a little refresher, and maybe there are some new things since you last took a peek at it. We'll be talking about two of our key programs, the National Student Data Corps, or NSDC as we call it, and the COVID Information Commons, we also call the KIC. Those are both part of the key programs we have here at the Hub that are funded by the U.S. National Science Foundation. We've also received funding from the U.S. National Institutes of Health and the Department of Transportation Federal Highway Authority. And so we're very grateful for that funding and support, and we're very grateful we get to work with all of you as a community. Then we'll have the student research presentations, which is the main event. Then we're going to talk about Northeast Big Data Hub resources and opportunities, learning and professional development resources that are open, available all the time around the planet, and new research opportunities for you to participate in. And then we'll have an open Q&A. You'll notice there's a Q&A button probably at the bottom of your screen. We're using the Zoom webinar functions, and you'll be able to put your questions in there. And we can either type answers in or we'll be able to talk about them. Next screen, please. So the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub was actually founded in 2015 with a grant from the National Science Foundation under a program called Harnessing the Data Revolution. So the Hub is a community convener and collaboration network that fuels data science innovation through diverse and inclusive partnerships with a special focus on underserved communities. And I was on the advisory committee for this, the Hub, since they were born in 2015. And then in 2020, they asked me if I'd like to lead it. And so I'm grateful to be executive director of the Hub. And we actually received our second award for the Hub in 2019 from NSF. At that point in 2020, when I became the executive director, the principal investigator for the Northeast Big Data Hub, Jeanette Wing, and I talked about the opportunity to create a student data corps. And I was specifically very interested in bringing data science awareness and education to students who don't have access to that education or don't even know that data science is something they can pursue. The good news is there's a lot more data science education available, but what we did to be able to help universally was to create at the time a Northeast Student Data Corps, and then it quickly went viral and global. So we renamed it to the National Student Data Corps with an international reach. Our premier program in the health focus area, these are our four focus areas: education, data literacy, health, urban rural communities, and responsible data science. Our premier health program is the COVID Information Commons, which is separately funded by the National Science Foundation, and we're delighted to have our KIC Student Paper Challenge winners with us today. Our other two focus areas, urban to rural communities, are growing. In the urban to rural communities area, we have a grant from the U.S. Department of Transportation Federal Highway Authority that's funding our transportation data science project you can participate in. And so you'll learn more about that today. And then under responsible data science, we have a lot of information related to security, privacy, and ethics, from responsible data science comic books to a new standard that we're working on with IEEE and Underwriters Laboratories for data and device interoperability and security and privacy around the world. So we thank you for joining us today. We welcome you to go to the About page and click on any of these little boxes to learn more and engage with us. Next slide, please. So the Northeast Hub community has grown so much. We're always so excited and sometimes shocked at the growth of the hub. Emily keeps track of all the numbers for us, and we update them quarterly. So at the end of December 2023, we had grown from about 1,400 members in 2019 to over 9,600 members around the planet and about 1,400 organizations. You can see how we work around the planet. We have a very large group in India that have joined the National Student Data Corps, and they have chapters there. And we look forward to this growing even further. And Emily, when she joined us as the NSDC program manager 2 years ago, a little over 2 years ago, she really helped us spark the NSDC and grow the chapter community and grow the overall community and all these programs. So I really want to thank her for that. And now pass it over to Emily.
Thank you, Florence, for that wonderful introduction. So I just want to share a quick overview of the two main hub programs that allowed us all to be here today on this event, one of them being the National Student Data Corps, or NSDC. So the NSDC is a community-developed initiative created to foster a diverse and welcoming data science community for learners of all ages, all backgrounds, and all skill levels. And in order to provide a welcoming and inclusive environment, the NSDC promotes collaborative programs that guide learners in their professional and educational development. So in 2023, the NSDC hosted its annual Data Science Symposium Challenge, a virtual forum that invited undergraduate and graduate students from institutions around the world to meet virtually with mentors, connect with other students, and complete their very own data science research projects. So today, we'll be hearing from 3 winning students or student teams of the 2023 Data Science Symposium: a student team from Vassar College, and students from the University of Connecticut and Seton Hall University. Some winners could not be here with us today, but we'll be sure to share their winning research with the community as well. Additionally, the COVID Information Commons, or CIC, which is another program hosted by the Hub, serves as a resource for researchers, students, and decision makers from all sectors to identify collaboration opportunities, leverage each other's research findings, and accelerate promising research regarding the broad societal impacts of the COVID-19 pandemic. So in 2023, the KIC hosted its 3rd annual Student Paper Challenge, inviting students from around the world to leverage the KIC resources, write a scientific research paper, meet virtually with peers and mentors, and join the research community addressing the COVID-19 pandemic and pandemic response more broadly. Today, we will see presentations of the winning graduate and undergraduate cohort submissions from institutions like Columbia University, Boston University, Colby College, North Carolina A&T State University, and Yale University. So let's meet today's researchers. So unfortunately, Sol could not be here today, but a big congratulations to Sol for winning 1st place in the graduate cohort of the Data Science Symposium. Today, we'll hear from Lily, Julia, and Pranav's team. We'll hear from Monica Estrella and Jasmine De Leon. And everyone's winning certificates can be seen at the bottom of the screen here. A big congratulations to all of them, and we're super excited to hear your research today. And we will also be hearing from Leisha, as you see on the certificate, or Margaret, Putra Nagara, Liam, who is here to represent his team. A big congratulations to Sydney and Zaran as well, although they couldn't join the event today. We'll hear from Kiana and Dinesh also. So all are very excited to share their research findings with you all, and I'm sure that you all are super excited to hear about their research findings as well. Quickly, I just want to mention, before we get started with the presentations, our team at the Hub wanted to make a quick announcement regarding the content of some of the presentations that you'll be hearing today. A handful of today's speakers will be sharing their research on a variety of topics, such as pandemic response, diversity of political opinions, global policy, neonatal care, and more. So some of this research may be emotionally challenging for listeners, and we encourage you all to take care while listening. Each presentation will be recorded and available via the Hub's YouTube channel if you do wish to listen at a different time. The content provided in today's webinar has been curated to provide a stimulating learning environment which broadens all of our intellectual engagement. So please listen to each of these presentations with an open mind and with compassion for the experiences and opinions of our fellow attendees. Now, it is my pleasure to pass it over to the first presenter of today. Jasmine, would you like to share your screen and begin?
Sure, thank you. So hi everyone, my name is Jasmine DeLeon. I am a senior at Seton Hall University, and I conducted my research through a National Science Foundation Research Fellowship at Syracuse University. So this is a layout of my presentation today, my process, methodology, results, conclusion, and implications for further research. So the deep question of my research is, what makes good reasoning and how do we know? My analysis takes this project to a 10,000-foot picture and asks, are there linguistic markers that are indicators of good reasoning? It's important to note for my research, which is on intelligence analysis, that intelligence has national and world-altering implications. A case study of this is that the intelligence analysis that program in Iraq led us into a war on faulty intelligence, and that war has impacted our foreign policy to this day. Another example is in 2021, the Office of the Director of National Intelligence released an estimate on climate change. And it's a concern of the United States and especially the intelligence community, how climate change will destabilize governments and democracies around the globe, put a strain on food and energy systems and military readiness, and create a greater demand for aid and humanitarian relief. So simply put, intelligence is important and has huge implications on the world. I think that the intelligence space can be a little bit difficult to talk about. Most people don't know much about how intelligence analysis works. So this is a little bit of background. In the US intelligence community, analysts write analytic reports that are used by people like generals and policymakers to make decisions. The research that I built on acknowledges that a lot of analytic reports lack clarity and defensibility, specifically when addressing gaps or alternative explanations in research. And my research began with the understanding that in the intelligence community, analysts are trained in structured techniques, which means tools to improve methods of reasoning. So maybe I make up a map or create a timeline to understand the chronology of an event. But what's unclear is if analysts are also trained in nuances of writing to put together their reports. So here's the research that I built on. My mentor and I worked on a project with hundreds of analytical reports. There's a codebook also created based on ICD 203. This is an intelligence community directive that governs the standards for producing and understanding intelligence products. Each of those reports was coded based on that codebook for reasoning. I used those reasoning scores and the reports themselves to understand possible linguistic indicators of good reasoning. So this is an example of a report. This is the source of all my data. Which level at the top is one of several fictional cases. The question here is which person with the name level is associated with a crime. Each of these reports came to be because there were things like social media posts or a police report or articles. And the report was created by a Turk worker to answer a question of, for example, which level is it? Amazon Mechanical Turk is a platform where people recruit others to do tasks online. This Turk worker answered the question following a format based on ICD 203 for what makes good reasoning. So you can see here what's included is the final judgment, a probability score, justification, assumptions, information evaluation, alternative hypotheses, and gaps. I used 96 of these reports and the scores for each of the reports on the reasoning, and this makes up all my data. So this is my process. I did a literature review to understand the intelligence community and what goes into this kind of data analysis. I also read 20 reports to form hypotheses on linguistics and other drivers of good and bad reasoning. I also did the report as if I were an Amazon Mechanical Turk worker. And what I found is that reasoning seems to be reflected in writing. So I was trying to understand the patterns of how reasoning was reflected in that writing to do my analysis. From this, I created an Excel of 96 of those reports and collected data points. And I used Python to run text analysis and an OLS regression on parts of speech. So I made other charts, but here are some of my results. These are the p-values of the correlations between the part of speech variables and the sum score, word count, and case name. So sum score here is the reasoning score for each of the reports. I want to highlight adjective proportion at this arrow. This is the proportion of adjectives to each report's word count. So this p-value matrix shows that adjective proportion is positively correlated with a higher reasoning score, and no other part of speech was strongly correlated. In this OLS regression, when I controlled for all parts of speech and the report case, adjectives, and what I found is that adjectives, proper nouns, and pronouns are statistically significant. A limitation of this regression is it doesn't control for word count. But what does this mean? So the last sort of part of my research is that I conducted an expert interview with a professor at the Georgetown University Masters in Applied Intelligence program, and she's also a FBI analyst. What she told me is that she never recalled writing during her formal intelligence training. And she also, in her classes, tells her students who are going to work in the intelligence field to not use adjectives in their reports because she thought that including more adjectives added more bias. But what we're finding here are some contradictory findings. An expert is telling you that adjectives are bad, but when you ask analysts to score reports' reasoning, they pay attention to adjectives whether they're aware of it or not. So writing reflects reasoning. I think this contradictory finding, the thing that this analyst said makes a good report, raises a lot of questions, but I think this data and our analysis can also show us something. I think that adjectives and proper nouns and pronouns add more concreteness to writing and thus reflects higher reasoning. But I also think that it shows that writing really matters. This raises questions about the ways that analysts are different agencies. And I also think that we can also look at how analysts are trained in other countries, and that this sort of data can help us possibly build an AI and looking at linguistic indicators of reasoning. So thank you to all these people, and thank you for listening to my presentation. It is an honor, and I'm excited to answer your questions.
Thank you so much, Jasmine. That was such an interesting presentation. A reminder to everyone who's tuning in, if you have any questions regarding Jasmine's research, anything that she just discussed, please drop them in the Q&A box at the bottom of your screen. We will be hosting a live Q&A session towards the end of this event, and we will pose your questions live to Jasmine so she can answer them. And next up, we have Liam, who is representing his team, Liam, Sydney, and Zeron from Colby College. Liam, would you like to go ahead and get started?
Absolutely. All right, share my screen here. Okay, let's get started. So my group's research is entitled Understanding the Community Pattern and Rhetoric Strategies of Anti-Vaxxers Through Twitter Analysis. Just as a preface, this was done during 2022. The Twitter API is no longer a thing, and it's no longer called Twitter, but hopefully in the future, things get a little better with regards to future research. So this was the first place winner of the 2023 CIC Student Paper Challenge, and was done by Sydney McCormack, Zeron Gu, and myself as part of a course at Colby. So I will be starting off with the objectives, methodology, and then just going through the motions. So first, I'll go over the research questions that guided our research process and analysis. Our first objective was to establish who are the opinion leaders spreading anti-vax rhetoric and misinformation, whether these were sort of more organic or they were political figureheads, just sort of understanding from a grassroots perspective, like who's spreading information on Twitter with regards to anti-vax information. Secondly, we wanted to analyze the characteristics of anti-vaxxer communities, shared beliefs, ideologies, lifestyles, etc. And third, we wanted to understand what rhetorical strategies are used in spreading anti-vax misinformation. So in order to do this, we primarily relied on R, the programming language R, and we collected 19,250 tweets based on hashtag filtering. Basically, we sort of brainstormed 21 hard-coded hashtags from our own personal knowledge, as well as news articles surrounding the anti-vax movement. Some of those we discovered through reading the articles in the annotated bibliography, which will be at the end, and you can access if you so desire through the link to the paper. Then furthermore, we went to extract unique user IDs from that list, sort of going from the tweets to just the individual users from 5,362 public accounts. And we obtained the follower network of those users from randomly chosen 293 public users with the extracted user info that we got. And then we produced visualizations to understand each research question. This was, once again, all done on one day, January 24th, 2022, as a restriction of sort of the Twitter API package that we were subscribed to. Okay, moving forward, our first question was, who are the opinion leaders spreading anti-vax misinformation? So we mapped follower count on the x-axis and anti-vax hashtag count, which of the tags that were used, and how frequently, on the y-axis. So towards the top right is where the most influential users will be, and finding users that had used more than 7 of those hashtags and had more than 9,000 followers gave us the top 10 influencers. In the red circles, you can see the outliers. So people who are respectively on the left, very relatively low followers, but had definitely highly used those hashtags, and someone who is in the community but had actually relatively used them very little. So furthermore, we took the tweet data that we had and used and sort of just created this visualization to display some of the common narratives of the top 10 users. So we noticed that a few of the common narratives used to foster relatability are family, which is encoded in yellow, religion, mostly Christianity, in purple, money in green, so a lot of financial influencers. For example, user G, these are anonymized, is a Bitcoin influencer, financial tech influencer. User I is a silver investor, a mining investor. And lastly, Trump/Protect America was the 4th narrative that we found. So I'm going to pass this over to Zoran, who recorded some audio to accompany this slide.
So another question that we are interested in is, what are the characteristics of anti-vax communities? We analyze it through the followers network that we collect from 300 users and roughly 200,000 followers. And our main method is the InfoMap community detection. So here's how it works. So the follower networks are represented in a 3-layered hierarchical network. On the bottom layer, each node represents a user. An arrow indicates the follower relation. So if A follows B, and then node B has an arrow pointing to A, meaning that information follows from B to A. The second and third layer of node do not represent individual users, but instead a group of users that form a community. It is based on a probabilistic model of random walk, which means that InfoMap would estimate the number of times a node would be reached if one walks randomly on the network from one node to the other. The arrows connecting the bigger nodes are not followers, but the estimated information flow. So we summarize the characteristics of the 4 largest communities in the table here. We can see that communities share some common features. Most of them joined Twitter pretty early and have already used the app for a few years. Demographically, Community 4 have many accounts in the UK, while Community 3 consists of many Canadian users. Communities also share similar political views. For example, Community 1 consists of many Trump supporters, and they tweet about similar events. For example, the Canada Freedom Convoy protests in reaction to Canadian government's vaccine mandate in January 2022 was mentioned a lot in Community 3. In terms of follower sizes, members from Community 2, 3, 4 have relatively medium follower sizes between 300 and 1,000. However, there are 2 members with 20K accounts in Community 1. So you can see there's a variation in terms of distribution of follower sizes within each communities. So community detection actually provides us with some valuable insights into what an anti-vaccine community looks like.
All right, thank you to Zoran for providing that audio. Fortunately, he couldn't make it today due to scheduling issues. It's midterms over at Colby, while I'm at Dartmouth and it's spring break. So that's a little rough, but glad he was able to contribute that. So moving forward, we also used LDA, latent Dirichlet allocation topic modeling to sort of gather together tweets that had a similar topic to each other by analyzing the text. We used one topic, the ST and SDLDAC is sort of a single topic implementation of LDA for Twitter. I think we used Python for that. So some of the common rhetorical strategies we found were concerns about government control, shown by vaccine mandates, control, believe, and doctor. Secondly, conspiracy theories about the official narrative, which also consisted of fights between conspiracy theorists and people arguing with them online. Medical misinformation, primarily surrounding myocarditis, shown by words like heart. Concerns about control with regards to the economy and work. Calls for political action. Lots of tweeting at the president of the US, Rand Paul, Senator Ron Johnson. And lastly, concerns about children, and specifically their health. So what conclusions can we draw from these analyses? First, for our first question, there's a variety of users spreading anti-vax rhetoric, and the most influential users appeal to common narratives and sympathy, ordinary religious parents who are concerned for their kids' health. As well, they're also geographically distributed, communities in Canada and the UK, as well as the US. And communities are homogenous in terms of age and followers. That answers our second question, and have weak ties, meaning that they don't interact frequently with each other, but their interactions are strong and tend to spread information quite well. Lastly, rhetorical strategies revolved around personal health, distrust of all things official, and the belief that official narratives are constantly changing lies. So in the future, we'd like to collect a larger data set, which was restricted due to rate limiting, and our data is only limited to 1 day. As well, we'd like to collect both the friends and follower network of the top 1% of users, ranked by the number of followers. Third, we'd like to have a greater method of checking for bots. We were able to determine in our paper, just by using this one website, I forgot the name, based on our own personal impression that the user was a bot, which was affirmed by this, but there's no 100% way to check for that through R or Python from our knowledge. But that's something we definitely like to explore, along with clustering of LDA. And lastly, we'd like to analyze some sort of method for checking for dog whistle hashtags, which are hashtags that aren't immediately obvious that are tied to the anti-vaccine movement, if possible. That could take the form of like topic modeling or sentiment analysis or something like that. So here's our annotated bibliography. This can also be accessed in the paper link, and it just gives an overview of all the different resources that we used to inform our research. Thank you so much to Bernard Koch, who was the professor for this course and now works at UChicago, for guiding us through this research process.
Thank you so much, Liam and Sydney and Zoran, although you're not on the call right now. Thank you both. You all did such a great job together. And there are already a couple of questions for you in the Q&A box, so we will hold those for that Q&A session towards the end of the event. Any additional questions you have for Liam and their team, please drop them in the Q&A box. And now I'd like to invite Monica, if you are ready to share your screen and begin your presentation.
All right. Are you able to see it?
Yes.
So hi, my name is Monica Estrella. I'm a student at the University of Connecticut, and today I'll be talking to you a little bit about my research called The Perceived Moral Patiency of Social Robots, Differences Across Morphologies. So today I'll be talking about the objectives of my project, as well as the methodology, result analysis, conclusions, and some implications for future research. So for the objective number 1 is to find correlations between participants' preferred terminology, or the words that participants use with the most frequency, and their perception of social robots' moral patiency. And then for objective number 2 is to explore human social constructs and heuristics and how we may apply them to non-living things. And now for the methodology. So for my data collection, I used data that was previously collected by Dr. Jamie Banks. And in her original study, participants were shown introductory videos of one of 3 kinds of social robots. So they had the humanoid, the spider, and the mechanical robot. And then for all of the social robots, they were all called Array. And they were then asked to write scenarios in which the robots were treated morally or immorally. And for my methodological approach, I analyzed the frequency of relevant words used within each moral scenario and within each condition, and then I analyzed the most common themes present in those descriptions. And then for the analysis method, I ran LDA topic modeling for each set of data using Python. I found the words with the highest frequency within each condition, and then I created a word cloud for each condition and made sure to remove any irrelevant words such as pronouns and other words. And then I analyzed the context in which the most common words were used, and then finally I looked for overall themes or topics and interpreted the differences between each condition. And then finally, for my interpretation, I analyzed whether participants preferred terminology reflected previous mental concepts or heuristics that they have about technology and social robots. So here is the stimulus that was used in the original study. So here we have the humanoid robot, here we have the mechanical, and here is the spider robot. So here we can see the words that had the highest frequency within the mechanical condition. So certain words such as knock were used in immoral situations a lot, and they referred to harming Ray by knocking it over. And then laugh was usually used in immoral scenarios, and people used it often to depict people making fun of Ray. And then the word damage and damaging was used in both moral and immoral contexts, and it was used in the context of people preventing Ray from getting harmed or people purposely harming Ray. Then for the spider condition, these were the words with the highest frequency. So the word box was used in the context of treating Ray immorally by putting it in a box to restrict it of its freedom. The word run was used also in an immoral context of running Ray over to harm it. And then words such as bring and brought were used to describe both moral and immoral situations. So some people use these words in the context of bringing Ray places to keep it safe, but in other cases, people use it in the context of bringing ray places to harm it. And then finally, for the humanoid condition, these are the words that were most frequently used within this condition. And something that I found interesting is that the word become was used often to like depict ray becoming characteristics that are usually attributed to humans. So for example, some people described Ray becoming depressed or becoming defensive or becoming sad. And most of these attributes that people used were negative. And then for the words information and inform, they were mostly used like in context in which Ray was giving like false information. And in these scenarios, people had the purpose of making Ray malfunction or to just like simply make it look bad. And then finally, the word problem was used in a positive context, such as when people would help Ray to like solve like an inconvenience, such as whenever it got lost. And now some conclusions and some implications for future research. So in the mechanical condition, a lot of the scenarios reflected the heuristic that a lot of people have that technology like will eventually like replace people in the workplace, that technology is gonna take over jobs. And so many of the scenarios reflected how humans felt like threatened by Ray. So they would try to look for ways to like make it look inferior. So I believe that future research could definitely look into methods to integrate this kind of technology in workplaces in ways that people can see it as an aid rather than as a threat. And for the spider condition, a lot of the scenarios reflected how people wanted to exert their dominance over Ray. So one thing that I noticed about this condition is that people would, oh, sorry. People would typically use the most aggressive terms when compared to other kinds of terminology. And for future research, it should look at strategies to prevent humans from being like physically aggressive against robots and trying to destroy them. So maybe this research could look into how changing the robot's appearance could make it so that humans are less likely to harm it. And then finally, for the humanoid condition, humans imagined when people were asked to create scenarios in which Ray was treated immorally, they usually depicted people giving Ray the wrong information to make him malfunction instead of using like very physically aggressive terms, such as the ones used in the spider condition. And then one possible explanation for this is that people may feel like more empathy toward the humanoid robot because it like most closely resembles them. And then for future research, could look into how more realistic humanoid robots could garner more like empathy from humans. And before I finish, I would like to give special thanks to Dr. Jamie Banks for being my mentor throughout this research process and for her huge contribution to this project. And I would also like to thank Dr. Jeffrey Stanton, Dr. Jasmina Toshiba, and Dr. Jeff Hemsley. Thank you.
Thank you, Monica. That was fantastic. You'll all notice that we dropped some information about Dr. Jamie Banks' study in the chat, along with some other research articles that were really helpful to Monica's research. So maybe if you're interested in the topic, you can use some of those resources yourself to learn a bit more. So thank you all so much. Again, the Q&A box is open for your questions, and we will have some questions to ask Monica after a couple of more presentations. Next up is Kiana. Kiana, if you are ready, we'd love for you to share your slides and begin your presentation.
Okay, let me share my screen. So, hi, my name is Kiana Hendricks, and I'm a student at North Carolina A&T State University. And my project is entitled A Stacking Ensemble Approach where I leverage plasma proteomics, metabolomics, and clinical data for COVID-19 severity prediction. So let me start with what are proteomics and metabolomics. And proteomics is essentially the study of a large collection of proteins, and proteins are really the workhorses inside of our cells. And this field studies what they do and how they interact with our body. And then metabolomics is the study of a large amount of metabolites, and they are small molecules that are the result of or necessary for our cellular processes. So together, they can give us an overview of how our bodies respond to diseases like COVID-19. And that is why they are important for any sort of model that makes predictions about severity. And then a stacking ensemble is a machine learning algorithm that produces predictions by strategically combining the outputs of multiple base models. And they really give a more accurate forecast if you have information from different data types and combine them together for more diversity. And next, the question I asked is, can a stacking ensemble machine learning model that integrates plasma proteomics, metabolomics, and clinical data accurately predict COVID-19 severity? And the objective really was to develop a model that can accurately predict COVID-19 severity using multiple types of data combined together. And so the method was the stacking ensemble method. And the results were enhanced predictive performance compared to the base machine learning models themselves. And it offers a comprehensive insight into COVID-19 severity from different perspectives. So we all know that the COVID-19 pandemic has had a huge impact on our world. And one of the biggest challenges when it comes to COVID-19 management has been the prediction of disease severity, which is important for being able to allocate resources appropriately for different patients. And multi-omic data can offer a comprehensive overview of an individual's health status, and being able to garner information from those different data types can give us a better understanding of disease severity. So my project built upon Demasaki et al.'s work, which included proteomics and clinical data into a traditional machine learning model. However, if you have integrated into a ML model, multi-omic data, comprehensive model evaluation metrics, and also ensemble metrics. And that is what this project aimed to do. So for the dataset overview, I used a deep multi-omic longitudinal study, which contained data from 209 COVID-19 patients. And this study was originally created to identify risk factors for long COVID. And so here is an overview of my methodology, starting with the 3 different data types and then going through pre-processing. The proteomics and metabolomics went through the same pre-processing steps, and then model tuning and selecting the best performing models to include into the final stacking ensemble. And then here's a closer look at the process for a stacking ensemble. So the data pre-processing. So for this project, I extracted just time point 1, which is the initial diagnosis. The original study had 3 time points, but I felt that the initial diagnosis would be the most important when it comes to applying such a model in the real world. And then, of course, I had reduced the data set to filter out any patients that didn't have omic data. And then for feature selection for the clinical features, I use recursive feature elimination. And for the omic data, I use principal component analysis and applied it to the proteomics and metabolomics data. Basically for dimensionality reduction, there were a lot of proteins and a lot of metabolites. So basically a lot of columns, but very few rows. And in order to have the data in a more suitable format for a machine learning model, I had to go through that process as well. And as you can see, the final dimensions after compared to the initial dimensions. And then for the final clinical features, there were a lot of features, but based on just domain knowledge and also the most informative features from feature selection, these were the final features for the clinical data. And then another important part was severity, class, and balance. As you can see, there is a lot less of the severe cases within the data set, and that is important to consider when it comes to how effective and informative a machine learning model can be. So that was another thing that I had to be aware of. And then when it came to model search and tuning, so I started with 10 classifiers or models, And within the training and the selection of the models, I also incorporated techniques to address the severity class imbalance that I previously mentioned. So I use a combination of border smote and random undersampling together to address that. And then for the stacking ensemble, so after selecting the initial 3 models for the 3 data types, they were input as features into a stacking ensemble. And in order to have a stacking ensemble, you also have to have a final estimator. So I chose a logistic regression, and essentially I chose these base models and the final estimator to have a diverse amount of models, making sure none of the models were really similar in architecture as well. And then I also evaluated them across the metrics you see here. And here you can see the performance metrics overall. And you can see that generally the SAC ensemble outperform the other models. For the clinical model, it's important to consider that the simplicity of the clinical data compared to more complex data like biological data, which is why it generally performed very well in general. But we wanted to ensure that we included information about all different data types together to have a more informative model. And also, one thing that was really important was recall severe, which is really the recall of specifically the severe cases of COVID-19. And of course, we know that that is basically the most important case of COVID to consider, and making sure that we accurately are able to predict that. And here you can see the confusion matrix. So 0 is for mild, 1 is for moderate, and 2 is for severe. And as you can see, there were no false predictions for the severe. However, there were a few for mild and moderate, but comparatively, the model performed well overall for the accurate predictions on the diagonal. And so further discussion, excuse me. I found that integrating multi-omic and clinical data into a stack ensemble does have promising utility for COVID-19 prediction. You can see that incorporating numerous diverse models with diverse types of data had a relatively overall high performance, especially where it mattered within recall severe. And of course, the emphasis on the recall severe helped minimize the false negatives. And I would say the limitations would be that the sample size was relatively small. And also, like I said, the class imbalance, while I attempted to address it, is still inherent to the data overall. And for further research, you could benefit from larger data sets. And also another important thing would be to incorporate external validation data sets as well, to validate it with different types of data from other studies as well. And then also it would be important to consider the biological implications, looking into the models and what they consider the most important proteins, most important metabolites for severity prediction, and be able to validate that against pre-existing biological research and studies would be important as well. And thank you.
Thank you so much, Kiana. That was also really interesting. We have a few. I know that everyone can't see all of the questions in the Q&A box. We do have a lot of questions for you all coming in already. Everyone's super interested in the research you're doing, and I hope that there are a few aspiring researchers out there that are getting some inspiration from you all, because it's such a interesting and broad range of topics to cover. So I'm really excited for the Q&A session coming up as well. And next up, we have Putra Nagara, if you would like to share your screen and begin your presentation.
Thank you, Emily. Let me share my screen. Okay, can you see my screen?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. Good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Putra Negara Riawindo. I'm from Boston University, and today I'd like to present my work with the title of Country Clustering Analysis of COVID-19 Pandemic Dynamics, Insights and Implication for Future Preparedness as part of the 2023 GIG Student Paper Challenge. So the agenda of my today's presentation would be first, I'll tell you about the objective, and we go through the methodology, result analysis, conclusions, and also acknowledgement. So as for the objective itself, the work was to assess country's pandemic performance by retrospectively analyzing each country response and outcome during pandemic for historical data of multiple features. And then after we got that, we tried to extract insights and lessons from country with similar base condition and approach to provide knowledge base to future preparedness. So the methodology that we used to do the work was, first we do the data collections. We extracted data from Google COVID-19 Open Data Repository, which comprises around 20,000 locations information from all around the world, with a total combination of around 50 features. And then we do data processing and feature engineering to ensure data sets reliability and integrity, entailing cleaning, manipulating, and combining the data to create unified data set for clustering analysis. And then after we got a nice piece of data sets, we do the k-means clustering, and supported by elbow plot analysis and iteration of several number of clusters to determine the optimum number of clusters. And after we got the optimum number of clusters, we do the interpretations, also visualization, to extract valuable insights, and we name the cluster after its distinctive pandemic response characteristic enhanced by several visualizations. So this is the results that I'd like to share with the rest of the audience today. After doing the clustering analysis, we got 3 distinct clusters that has its unique characteristic that we would like to share. The first cluster, we call it resilience urban health capitals, characterized by high COVID cases, but effective response. And they also have a high urbanization, strong economies, robust healthcare system. They also have a high life expectancy, low pollution and comorbidity mortality rate, with a lower government response stringency, suggesting strategic public health approaches. And also moderate mobility to essential places, low workplace mobility, remote work adaptation, and then successful balance of economic continuity and public health prioritization. If you see on the chart on the right, these first cluster are mostly aggregated around European countries, United States, and also Australia and Japan. And the second cluster we have is vulnerable rural health deficit. They have the lowest COVID-19 cases, but they face a unique rural healthcare challenges. They have an economic constraint and lowest human development indicators that might affect the response to the COVID-19 pandemic. They also have a high mobility in essential services, with low remote work adherence, highlight dependency on the in-person activities. They also have a moderate government response stringency with potential impact on containment. And they also have addressing healthcare disparity and rural transmission dynamics is crucial. And these second clusters are mostly aggregated in the African regions and also some the South Asian countries. And the third cluster that we identified through the data sets that we do is the urban diabetes burden and residential refugees. This cluster are characterized by moderate COVID-19 cases with a balanced infection rate with a mix of urban and rural population. They also have a lower mobility to non-essential places, suggesting reduced public space engagement. They also have a moderate workplace mobility with notable shift toward residential staying, while high residential mobility indicating strong compliance with stay-at-home guidelines. But the last characteristics that this cluster has is the emphasis on protecting vulnerable population, particularly those with health condition like diabetes, through targeted measures. And this last cluster are mostly aggregated in the Asian countries, like Southeast Asian, and then Middle East, and also in the Latin America. And if you'd like to kind of dig deeper into the analysis that we did, you can go through the GitHub repositories that will be posted on the chat link. So the conclusion and the future research, the first is after we did some clustering analysis through the different conditions that we have from the Google COVID-19 Open Data Repository, we found that different country clusters exhibited different distinct responses with different base condition. And by understanding these distinct clusters can aid in formulating effective strategies and policies for the future pandemics. And for the future research, we might also need to incorporate country-specific policies to enhance the clustering analysis for better results. And in this opportunity, I'd like to do some acknowledgement first for Google for providing the COVID-19 Open Data Repository, and also for the Northeast Big Data Innovation Hub for the opportunity to participate in the Cake Student Paper Challenge, and also for GitHub to host the Research Jupyter Notebook repository. I think that's all from me. Thank you for listening. If you have any question, I'll be more than happy to answer the questions. Thank you.
Thank you. I see Aditya is clapping his hands for you. That was a great presentation. We did drop in the chat a link to that GitHub repository. It's got a lot of great information in there for those who are looking to learn more. You should have full access to that GitHub repository, so feel free to use that link and go explore. And up next, we actually have a team from Vassar College, Lily, Julia, and Pranav. Most of the team could not be here today. Lily, I know, joined us, but because most of the team couldn't be here today, they recorded their presentation for you all so that everyone could participate a little bit. So I will share my screen and you all can watch their great presentation. Okay, and now let me know if you can't hear it. Here we go.
Hi, welcome to our presentation. Today we're going to be presenting on maternal hypertension and postneonatal SIDS. My name is Julia Vitale.
My name is Lily Watson, and our third team member is Pranav Park.
And we're from Vassar College.
Sudden infant death syndrome, or SIDS, is a sudden death of an infant that remains unexplained despite a thorough case investigation. It remains the leading cause of death in postneonatal infants in the US today, but despite this, the pathophysiology remains poorly misunderstood. So the triple risk model for SIDS remains the current hypothesis for SIDS. It requires 3 factors to coalesce to trigger the syndrome: a critical development period, which are the 2 to 4 months directly after birth, physiological vulnerability, and an external stressor, which can be the sleep environment.
So we used a case control study design in this project. Our controls were randomly selected from all registered live births in 2019, and our data came from the CDC Natality Birth Report. We selected 5,000 population controls, which we excluded if hypertension data was incomplete. And our cases were also eligible for control selection in this study design, which is called base sampling. Our cases were all postneonatal SIDS cases born in 2019, although the death could occur in 2019 or 2020. And all of our cases were greater than 28 days at the time of death, and we were able to identify about 1,100 cases in this cohort.
Our exposure was classified as either pre-existing maternal hypertension or gestational. These were indicated on the live birth certificate in the maternal health section. Pre-existing maternal hypertension must be clinical hypertension diagnosed at least 20 weeks before gestation or before pregnancy. And gestational hypertension was classified as either clinical hypertension diagnosed 20 weeks after gestation or preeclampsia. Our outcome, SIDS, is defined as the unexplained infant death despite a thorough case investigation and is indicated by code R95 on the cause of death. And it must occur between 28 days after birth and 12 months of age.
So for this project, we conducted multivariable logistic regressions to analyze these associations between maternal hypertension and SIDS. Initially, we did minimal models for both forms of hypertension, controlling for just a few confounders that are based on previous literature. And we also ran expanded models with a greater number of confounders also based on previous literature. We also conducted a mediation analysis where our mediating variable was infant birth weight. And we also used the same expanded list of confounders for that analysis.
We found that there was a significant association between pre-existing maternal hypertension and SIDS. Specifically, our initial model found that mothers with pre-existing hypertension had 1.83 times the odds of having a child with post-neonatal SIDS compared to those without pre-existing hypertension. Our expanded model found that mothers with pre-existing hypertension had 1.62 times the odds of having a child with post-neonatal SIDS.
Our analyses regarding gestational hypertension showed no significant results in both the minimal and expanded model. And our mediation analysis which we conducted for the relationship between pre-existing hypertension and SIDS showed that birth weight is a partial mediator in the relationship between these two variables, and both the direct and indirect effects are significant.
Overall, we found that there was an association between pre-existing maternal hypertension and postneonatal SIDS, and our base sampling methodology allows our odds ratio estimates to approximate risk ratios, which supports the findings of previous literature. However, we did not see an association between gestational hypertension and postneonatal SIDS, which remains inconsistent with prior literature.
Our mediation analysis findings suggest that birth weight is a mediator, which means it's on the causal pathway between pre-existing maternal hypertension and postnatal SIDS. And in this scenario, the hypertension may be causing low birth weight, which is then contributing to SIDS risks. However, both the direct and indirect effects of this analysis are significant, indicating that the effect of maternal hypertension on SIDS is not entirely filtered through the infant's birth weight.
We propose a potential mechanism for this mediation effect based on prior literature, specifically the triple risk model. We know that pre-existing maternal hypertension has direct effects on physiological vulnerability, which increases risk. It also reduces uteroplacental blood flow, which causes a hypoxic environment in the uterus during fetal development. Both the hypoxic environment in the uterus and reduced uteroplacental blood flow can contribute to intrauterine growth restriction, which leads to births small for gestational age. This then can cause abnormal arousal responses, cardiac abnormalities, and altered immune responses, which then contribute to heightened physiological vulnerability, increasing the odds and risk for SIDS.
The limitations of our study include confounding, so we have unknown confounding as well as unmeasured confounding. Infant sleep has shown to be a significant risk factor for SIDS, but it is not included in this data set. We also have potential misclassification of the exposure and the outcome, as hypertension is underreported on birth certificates, and other causes of death can potentially be misdiagnosed as SIDS. However, we believe that this misclassification is likely non-differential between cases and controls, which would bias our estimates towards the null. We also had a broad exposure category for gestational hypertension. That category included both pregnancy-induced hypertension and preeclampsia, which are two different disorders with very different physiologies, which may complicate the associations that we found.
To conclude, our case control study found an association between pre-existing maternal hypertension and increased odds for postneonatal SIDS. We saw that a non-differential misclassification bias may mean that our results likely underestimate the true effect of this association. We novelly demonstrated that this association is partially mediated by infant birth weight, and that both the direct and indirect effects are significant. No association was found between gestational hypertension and postneonatal SIDS, which is inconsistent with existing literature, but it is possible that our broad exposure category for gestational hypertension clouds an existing association.
Thank you so much for listening to our presentation, and feel free to ask any questions you may have during the Q&A period.
That was another great presentation. Thank you. I think Lily's still here. Thank you, Lily, for jumping on the event today, and for Julia and Pranav, who were not able to be here. Congratulations to you both again on your win. Fantastic research. Again, as we mentioned earlier, some of the research will be about some sensitive topics. So if you do have some questions about this research, please remember that and just phrase your question in a sensitive and a sensitive way so that everyone stays comfortable. And it's a great topic, and that's why they're studying it, because we do need to talk about it a bit more. And up next is actually another video presentation by Dinesh Boja from Yale University. Dinesh studied the sufficient COVID-19 quarantine and testing on international travelers from China. So this is another great presentation, and I will play that for you as well.
Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dinesh Boja, and I'm a sophomore at Yale University. Today, I'll be presenting my project, Sufficient COVID-19 Quarantine and Testing on International Travelers from China, a project I conducted at the Townsend Laboratory at the Yale School of Public Health. As I'm sure we're all aware, the SARS-CoV-2 pandemic demonstrated the increasing risk of infectious disease globally. SARS-CoV-2, also known as COVID-19, has led to over 700 million infections as of February 2024, with potentially higher infections that were unreported. In order to prevent this increase of infection within China, China used what was called the zero COVID policy, which sought to mitigate the effects of the pandemic. Using strict lockdowns, contact tracing, and mass testing of all Chinese citizens, China was able to keep the prevalence really low. But Chinese citizens were discontent with the strategy, as the zero COVID policy caused food shortages, severe economic damages, and social strain. Chinese citizens protested against the policy until it was repealed in December 2022. However, the sudden repeal of the zero COVID policy led many scientists to believe that it might cause more damage than ever before. In fact, it caused many people to think that China would have a higher surge of infection than ever before, which in 2023 of January, it did. After the increase of infections within China, many other countries were fearful that this increase of infection would go to their own country as well, causing them to place significant travel restrictions on Chinese travelers, ranging from simple testing and quarantining to complete bans. However, we wanted to determine if these restrictions were actually necessary, and if not, what restrictions were actually needed to prevent an increase of infection within other countries. To do this, we used the sufficient quarantine model. The sufficient quarantine model, developed by my lab in a paper published by Wells et al. In Lancet, looks at the optimal quarantine duration, which is the minimum duration such that the number of infections with and without travel are equalized. This way, we can ensure that the quarantine isn't too strict, meaning that there's a waste of resources, or too loose, meaning that there's an increase of infection. To do this, the model looks discretely at where the infections are coming from. For example, if in this case country A is quarantining against travelers from country B, it looks at where the number of infections from country A are coming from specifically, and determines what the effects of a quarantine would be with and without travel, and determines when the number of infections would be equalized. Good afternoon, everyone. My name is Dinesh Boja, and I'm a sophomore at Yale University. Today,
Sorry about that.
means that there's going to be a decrease in the number of infections, as all the people who have infections and get through the quarantine or get into the country are cured of their disease before they enter. These lines all intersect at around 10 days, meaning that the optimal quarantine is a duration of 10 days. Any earlier means that there's going to be more infections coming in than with no travel, and any durations that are longer means that there's going to be unnecessarily strict restrictions, causing extra economic burden on the country. To make this model, we need to collect some data, such as the vaccination rate, population, infection-derived immunity, prevalence, and travel statistics. After getting this information, we're able to get the results of the sufficient quarantine model. In this case, after looking at China shortly after the zero COVID policy was released in mid-February 2023, we're able to see that countries like South Korea need a quarantine duration of 14 days, while some countries like England need a duration of 1 day, showing that there's a significant disparity in the number of sufficient quarantine duration days that are necessary to keep the number of infections low. Here's all the graphs that were derived from the sufficient quarantine model. We can see that regardless of geographic location, some countries have high rates of quarantine durations that are needed, while some countries need lower rates, meaning that there are some other statistics that must be in play other than cultural and geographic location that have an effect on the minimum sufficient quarantine. This is the same data in table format. We can see not only the number of quarantine durations that are necessary for each country, stratified by each test, but also stratified by where the prevalence data for China was derived, from World Health Organization data or from self-reported prevalence statistics. We can see that depending on where the data for Chinese prevalence is derived from, there's a significant change in the minimum sufficient quarantine, meaning that it's important for countries to have accurate and timely data to get accurate information on their public health interventions. Now, we can look at some of the implications of the minimum sufficient quarantine model and how this might affect policy moving forward. First, we can note that travel metrics have the highest impact on the minimum sufficient quarantine. This makes sense, as the travel rate is going to be where the most volume of infection is going to be coming from. For countries with high rates of travel, like Japan and South Korea, a strict quarantine is necessary, while countries with less travel, like Scotland, don't need as strong as a quarantine. Prevalence also has a very strong influence on the minimum sufficient quarantine, as if the destination has a very high prevalence, any incoming infection will not have as strong as of an impact. For example, if a country has a 50% prevalence, any one infection coming in would be like a drop in the bucket and wouldn't really change the minimum sufficient quarantine. Vaccination rate has a counteracting effect. Not only does it lead to softer quarantines because the population is very immune to infection, but also leads to stricter quarantines, as any influx of individuals might cause the immunity to decrease overall due to the introduction of susceptibles. Above all, this model represents the importance of finding accurate and timely data for effective public health interventions. We opted to look for different statistics of Chinese prevalence because some reports suggested that WHO-derived statistics aren't necessarily the best. The World Health Organization statistics suggest a prevalence of 0.0067%, while other measures, like the prevalence of infection within Chinese travelers' planes to Italy, was about 22.7%, which would mean that there's going to be longer recommended quarantines. We opted for a middle ground, looking at an estimate from Fu et al., which looked at the self-reported infections in Chinese citizens at about 0.1%. The differences in self-reported and World Health Organization prevalence in China would significantly change the suggested quarantine, as these entries from the table suggest. In Scotland, with no testing, self-reported data suggests a 7-day quarantine, while World Health Organization data suggests only 1 day, meaning that it's necessary for countries to have accurate and timely information to determine the suggested quarantine and make optimal public health decisions for their constituents. This model represents a versatile tool for pandemic mitigation, not only for COVID, but for future pandemics as well. This model is very conservative, so the suggested quarantine is truly the strictest quarantine needed to prevent an increase of infection due to travel. And then leftover resources that are no longer needed for quarantines can be used in more effective ways, like case finding and tracing. The versatility of this model for future pandemics and for different pairs of countries makes it an optimal tool for pandemic mitigation, no matter what the case. Thank you for your time and attention. And if you have any questions, feel free to reach out to me, and I'd be happy to talk.
Thank you, Dinesh. Although Dinesh could not be here today, we want to congratulate him on his win and on the great research that he's accomplished as well. We dropped some information in the chat for you all regarding some papers and documentation that you could take a look at. That has to do with his research, along with he offered his email address. If you have any questions about his research or presentation, you can feel free to email those to him. And lastly, as we're coming down to the last research presentation, the last research presentation will be by Margaret Zhang. She was at Columbia University and again could not be here today, so she sent a recording of her presentation. So I will now allow her to present.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Margaret, a recent graduate master from Columbia Biostat Department. I'm really honored here to have this opportunity to present our finding, and thanks to the invitation and the great help from my friends in for the modeling part. Together, we will be presenting our study on the projected disease burden of type 2 diabetes in China following the removal of the zero COVID policy. This work for the research-oriented purpose mainly focus on understanding how pandemic policy and health crisis interplay and how does that influence our patients with chronic disease like the diabetes. China adapted to a dynamic zero COVID strategy until December 2022. While successful in managing the pandemic outbreak, this approach led to the underreporting of other diseases, including type 2 diabetes. Diabetes is a growing concern globally and expect to see a significant rise in the prevalence in China from 2020 to 2030. With pandemic, people with diabetes facing bigger risk, make it really important to understand how this issue connect with us as we move away from the strict COVID rules. Due to the timing of the student paper challenge, we developed this model before 2024. Our goal was to predict a possible increase in the Omicron variant cases from November 2022 to February 2023, particularly among people with diabetes 2. We sought to estimate the rates of the vaccination, infection, hospitalization, and death, especially among diabetes patients with and without comorbidities, and to project the incidence of the new diabetes cases linked to the COVID. We utilize the age structure stochastic compartmental model to simulate the Omicron wave across 14 age groups. The SLIR model is a very classic epi and mathematic model used to simulate the spread of infectious disease in a population. It is based on the assumption that the individual in the population can be classified into 4 compartments: successful, latent, infectious, and removed. And our model accounts for the factors like the rate of vaccination, the efficiency of the vaccine, and the decrease in the immunity over time, and the limitation of the hospital resources. Additionally, we use the Monte Carlo method for simulating the development of the newly onset diabetes and the comorbidity in the recovered individual. For the basic model structure, part A is the SLIR transmission I mentioned. B is the disease progression. C is hospital resources constraint. D is vaccination effectiveness. E is the antiviral drug. F is outcome in the DM and the comorbidity. G is the post-accurate in the DM. So the main focus in the study in the part is a part F and G. Noticeably in the part F, the comorbidity in the DM patients include a various like the heart failure, the PVD, the liver disease, the cancer, the dementia, and so on. We did not consider the situation in children aged under 18 years old. And for G parts, we focus on the 2 groups. So it's the patients without diabetes who develop the new onset DM and the DM patient who experience new onset comorbidities. So now we are showing our estimates indicate that the peak of the hospitalization in general occurs around 23 January, reaching like 15.1 million individuals. The peak is also mirrored in the ICU admission and the fatalities as well. The plots underneath reveal a consistent pattern. The older age group exhibits a higher rate of hospital admission, ICU admission, and mortality. The strand aligned with older group. The older age group also has highest proportion of the unvaccinated individuals. Importantly, we also found out the burden on the diabetes patient was significantly higher, especially for those with comorbidities. This finding underscores the critical need for the targeted healthcare strategy for the at-risk of vulnerable population. In conclusion, our study highlights the effectiveness of the telehealth during the pandemic and emphasize the need for continued research, particularly in refining our model with new data, exploring the additional factors like the hospital capacity and medication impacts. The flexibility of our model for global application and addressing at-risk patient group is vital for optimizing the healthcare delivery post-pandemic. Because now there are greater interest in public health and post-pandemic related research, I want to initiate a portion of our discussion to the long COVID and its associates with the disease burden. Current studies suggest that the long COVID is an emerging and potentially long-term condition that can impair the individuals. There also a lack of detailed data on the disability caused by long COVID, highlights the urgent need for the comprehensive research. Also, the government really needs to step up its game and pour more resources into reaching long COVID. So we are talking now about the digging deep into how it impacts people's life and the full scope of disability it will cause. We also want to consider, for instance, the comparative perspective. Some research indicates that the long COVID imposes a more substantial disability burden than even heart disease or cancer. Consider its potential for the displace of people's work and shake the labor market. Now there is a wake-up call if there ever was one. Long COVID is changing the game, and it's time for our approach to the research and public health planning to evolve with it. Thank you so much.
And thank you, Margaret, for that great presentation. She could not be here today, but she wanted us to make sure that we dropped her email address in the chat. Again, any questions that you have, please feel free to email them to her. We really appreciate all of the great work that you have put together. And now I will jump back into our slides quickly. So we just want to thank everyone for their insightful presentations. It's been so amazing to watch. A reminder to everyone to drop their questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I will just quickly, before the Q&A session, inform you of a few resources and events that we host here at the Hub that may be of interest to you. So here's a quick overview of the resources and opportunities that you can all explore on the Hub's website. So if you're interested in browsing over 1,000 data science resources in multiple languages, you can visit the Data Science Resource Repository, or DSRR, or the Learner and Educator Centrals to teach or learn data science at your own pace. You can join a COVID working group and engage with students and mentors and learn about scientific research together. If you're looking for real-world data science skills, you may want to participate in a data science project. With 9 projects to date hosted on the NSDC website, you can gain a variety of skills and certificates of completion that you can share directly with your networks. If you are looking for leadership experience, you can start an NSDC chapter at your institution or in your region. There are currently 39 chapters that span the United States, India, and Bangladesh. So you can connect with hundreds of other data science enthusiasts and collaborate across the globe. You can join our Slack channels to communicate with learners and researchers. And you can find hundreds of career resources on the Career Central. So we list job opportunities, scholarships, internships, fellowships, and more, as well as resources to best prepare you for your interviews. We also offer a variety of ways you can actually get involved with the Hub, like making data science videos about a topic of interest, maybe, helping to translate learning materials into different languages, and maybe becoming a mentor for students who are new to the field. So all of this can be found at the link at the bottom of the screen, and we'll be dropping all of those links in the chat for you as well. And we would like to invite you to some newly launched challenges and projects. If you are inspired by all of the fantastic research that you saw today and would like to participate and create your own research, we just launched the 2024 NSDC Data Science Symposium and Kick Student Paper Challenge. So the call for participation opens today. So you can go ahead and jump right in. And our first mentorship session will be coming up shortly. So submissions will be due at the end of July, so you have some time. And you may have the opportunity to present your research next year on a live webinar hosted by the Hub, just like the one today. So to learn more about these challenges, you can use the links in the chat below, and we really hope to see you sign up soon. Another opportunity for collaboration, networking, and skill development, we'd like to invite you to join the Transportation Data Science Project, or TDSP. The TDSP is a guided data science project that will allow you to analyze an open data set and create real-world data-driven insights and recommendations for the U.S. Department of Transportation, Federal Highway Administration. The project comes in two formats, the Explorer TDSP and the Navigator TDSP. The Explorer has no prerequisites, no Python experience needed. The Navigator is designed a bit more for an intermediate to advanced learner, so some knowledge of Python would be helpful for that project. You can choose to participate in one or both. If you do choose to participate, you may gain a certificate of completion from the Hub, network with other participants and TDSP mentors, get a project highlight on the Hub's website with some credit to you, and you may be invited to present your research virtually to professionals at the U.S. Department of Transportation. It's really a great opportunity to grow your skills and your network, and our goal is to create a supportive learning community that allows for future opportunities like future networking and possibly additional webinar presentations like today's. So please visit the website to learn more, and we hope to see you on the next mentoring call. And finally, as our presenters are preparing for your great questions, we'd like to extend an invitation to the KIC Student Working Group. The KIC invites students of diverse academic backgrounds and levels of research experience to join the Student Working Group and contribute to the future of pandemic research. Currently, the working group is participating in a very exciting project, the Analyzing Pandemic Response Project, for all of those who are interested in developing your skills in data science for public health. So again, we will drop all of these links in the chat for you so you can jump right in. Now, I'd be happy to let our researchers do the rest of the talking. So we will begin the Q&A portion of this webinar. So as a reminder, post those questions in the Q&A box at the bottom of the screen. I will now pass my virtual microphone over to Aditya, who will lead the Q&A portion of the event. Aditya?
Hi, everyone. Let's start with the Q&A session. We had an amazing session, so let's go with this. So first question is for Jasmine. How might adjectives create bias? What recommendations would you offer to those trying to minimize language that create biases in research or surveys, but still offer concreteness?
And I'll drop all the questions in the chat as we go on so people can read them as well.
I think that adjectives can add bias. Maybe if like descriptive words are used in some of the reports like this, this report is, the person that's responsible is blank, this level is responsible because they did not add, they were clearly not involved in something. I think that that's a really good question. And part of answering it, I think, involves researching a little bit more deeply into other linguistic indicators, because what I did was more take parts of speech from different, from these reports. And what I'd be more interested in too in my next level of research is looking at how those parts of speech interact with each other. The adjectives creating bias came from the interview with the expert analyst from the FBI who teaches at Georgetown. And that's what she said, is that like, well, maybe if someone's saying that this is bad or this data is good or this data is bad, that can provide descriptiveness, but maybe not as much concreteness. So I think this is a really good question. This is definitely something that I'd hope to explore more in further research.
That's an excellent insight. Now, moving on for our next question. Um, this question goes to Liam. Do you and your team have hypotheses about how anti-vax communications are evolving over time, or how they might evolve for future pandemics? Even with increase in measles going on now, do you have any perspectives or plans for more research?
With regards to future pandemics, I mean, definitely the world has changed so much after COVID that the rhetoric used during the pandemic is going to inform future communication with regards to distribution of vaccines, as we discussed in our presentation, and basically everything. As for future research, I mentioned earlier that the Twitter API has kind of shut down as a result of Elon Musk's buyout of Twitter and subsequent rebranding. I guess in the future, maybe we would pursue another similarly open social media website and analyze that during any future events. But as for how as for now, we don't have any particular plans for future research.
Thanks for shedding light on that topic. Moving ahead, we have a question for Monica. Was a definition of moral and immoral provided to participants? Did you screen participants for their pre-existing sentiments towards robots? For example, did they enter the project with a positive or negative view of technology?
So from what I remember, there wasn't like a pre-screening to see if participants had like pre-existing sentiments for this study. For my secondary analysis, I just focused on like what kinds of words people used. So for like for moral scenarios, this refers to like in which the robot was treated with like respect, and allowed to like work without any difficulties. And then for immoral situations, basically it was like people trying to destroy the robot or making it like malfunction on purpose. Yeah, I definitely think that future research could definitely look more into like what pre-existing sentiments people have toward the robots.
Thanks for sharing your expertise. Kiana, we have one question for you. It looked like the clinical random forest approach in some cases may have performed better than the ensemble. Can you comment on that?
Yes, the clinical model performed better in many ways because of the simplicity of it. So it would just be like binary yes, no, or if it's gender, male, female, things like that. But the inclusion of the metabolomics and the proteomics was to have a more informed model, specifically to be able to see with future research what proteins and which metabolites strongly impacted the model. So the clinical was more so to have some more grounded information included in the model as well. So for example, if someone is diabetic or not. So that's also why it performed a lot better because it's a simpler data set using a simpler model. But to add more complexity, that is why I included the other data. And another thing would be to try to also improve the accuracy of the stacking ensemble overall, but including the statistics, well, the metrics from all the data types overall, the stacking ensemble was more robust.
I'm glad that you brought it up. Putra Nigara, we have a question. How did you decide on Google Health COVID-19 Open Data Repository for your dataset?
Thank you for your questions. I have screened I actually have a couple of candidates to use as my data sets for the clustering analysis. And when I compare those data sets, I found that the Google Open COVID-19 data sets has like a lot of features that I can extract and I can choose. And it also has way more observations than the other data sets. So it is kind of better curated and kind of straightforward, and it has a lot of rich features that I can extract to make a better analysis. I think that's why I choose that's why I chose the COVID-19 from Google datasets.
Thank you for your insightful response. We have Lily here. Lily, was there a threshold at which infant weight did not correlate with a high SIDS risk?
Hi, thank you for the question. We did not establish a specific threshold for the infant birth weight with our model.
Thank you. Thank you so much. Now I would like to hand it over back to Emily, our virtual mic, so she can
Thanks,
continue
Aditi.
with it.
Thank you. Yeah, we have a few more questions for you all. Let's see what else we have. I'm going to jump back to Monica for a second. We have a question here. Did you get a chance to look at results from other research on similar robot interactions to see what the patterns and anomalies are?
So the other research that I looked at basically focused more on like how people, like the perceptions that people have about humanoid robots. I'm sorry, could you repeat the question again?
Yeah, of course. Did you get a chance to look at results from other research on similar robot interactions to see what the patterns and anomalies are?
Yeah, so basically the research I saw was more about like how people perceive the humanoid robots. I didn't see that much research on like other kinds of social robots.
Okay. That's interesting. That's good to know. And I'm also wondering, I thought this was an interesting question as well. I know that you mentioned that the robot's name was Ray, and some people in the chat were wondering if the name Ray or the robot, it was meant to be like more of a gender neutral name or a gender coded name, and whether the researcher believed that maybe gender played a part in the study and the interactions. Did you read anything about that?
That's a really good question. So I believe from what I remember about like talking with Dr. Jamie Banks, Ray is it's like meant to be like a gender neutral term. So I feel like it would be interesting to see like other research if like assigning a particular gender on a robot would make any difference. So that's definitely something that future research could look into.
Very interesting. Thank you for sharing that. I'm
I have a question for Liam.
Go ahead. Go
We
ahead.
had a question that came from Jennifer, and thanks for that. How did you define the categories such as money, religion, and Trump Protect America? And the second question, yeah, go
Sorry.
ahead, go ahead.
Okay. These categories were qualitatively determined in our analysis by taking the top 10 users and sort of finding common terms and color coding them from their user bios.
Could you say more about the significance of posters' age and other demographic details? How did you define middle age in your research?
Give me a second to check if we've explicitly defined age in our analysis. Yeah, on one side, usually we are going off user, like they chose to say that they're this age. Otherwise, it's not a publicly accessible characteristic, like in terms of the statistics that Twitter provided. So it was mostly self-provided, and we took those.
Okay, that sounds nice. And Kiana, there are a couple of questions for you as well. Where did you get the data set from? Was the medical data encrypted somehow? What years do the data actually represent?
So I got the data from a paper that I found. They provided the data, and the data was it encrypted? There was no like personal identifying information on the data. Of course, it's still basically sensitive data as well, but there is no names, anything else like that. In the years, I believe it represents 2021, but I don't remember for sure. I believe 2021 or 2022. And the last question. Can you say more about how you selected your models?
Did you
I
say what about how you selected the models?
tried to select a more diverse range of models, like some more simplistic ones like a random forest or logistic regression, and then incorporating more complex ones, uh, just to see which ones would work best on each data type. Like I said, I wanted the proteomics, metabolomics, and the clinical data to each have a distinct type of model so that when they're put into the stacking ensemble, they're leveraging the different characteristics of each model along with the different characteristics of the data itself. After I researched, I realized that would be a better way to get a more robust prediction and also improve the performance of the model overall.
Great. Thanks for sharing your information on that. Jasmine, what other fields do you feel your research would be useful in? For example, could we apply these principles to an analysis of medical records and patients' outcome?
Absolutely. I think that because my research is about linguistics and what makes good reasoning, this can be a good basis for building AI in all kinds of fields that not only help us train ourselves in good reasoning, but identify it.
Great point. We have a question for Lily. Given the relationship between birth weight and SIDS, do preterm babies who are likely to be underweight also at a higher risk of SIDS?
Yes, with our mediation analysis, we found that both the direct and indirect effects of birth weight on the association between maternal hypertension and post-neonatal SIDS were significant. So you could say that the effect is filtered through birth weight.
Thank you for your thorough response on that. Putra Nigara, did the measurement of mobility as a tool for transmission also considered government policies about masking? Perhaps not, as masking compliance is tricky to measure.
Yeah, actually, on the data sets that I use, they're not directly talking and measures the masking compliance because, as you've mentioned, it is very tricky to measure. And because, yeah, it is I think it's kind of hard as well to track because most of the data from Google's kind of track people's mobility based on their movement from their gadget and device. So yeah, I think based on that GPS data alone, we cannot track the masking compliance. I think that's my response.
Thank you for sharing your expertise. Now, I'll again go back to Emily. Emily, if you have any questions, we can continue.
Sure, thank you. Yeah, I have a question actually for all of you, so maybe we can go around the virtual room and see how everyone's response differs. We have been here at the Hub, a lot of our programs have been focused on research lately, teaching people how to do research, teaching people about the bias that's behind maybe different parts of the research process and more. And a big question that we're getting from a lot of students is how do you even come up with a research question? What is too broad? What's too specific? How do I start? Where do I, how do I even come up with my exact question so that I can even start the research? So my question for you all is, how did you come up with your research question or your hypothesis for your project and kind of just get started? So I don't know, I'll just go around the room the way that you guys are on my screen right now. Jasmine, do you wanna mention a bit about that, your process there?
Sure. For my case, my research was based on a previous project, the TRACE project, that worked with these reports. And what I was looking for is what are sort of gaps in this research. A lot of the research had been conducted deductively, and I wanted to look at something that they hadn't particularly focused on, which was linguistics, because I study journalism, that's one of my minors. And I think my question about linguistic markers of good reasoning came up because I was taking lots of classes through the NSF fellowship at Syracuse, and we were taking lots of philosophy classes about like how like philosophy of data science, philosophy of logic. And I think that what I was thinking is, okay, so how is that reflected in the way that I'm writing something, or like how can AI pick up on those things? So it's a combination of having the project previously, working with my mentor, having also just sort of entered the space of data science through the fellowship, and reading on my own about philosophy. And there's like really, really interesting philosophers that just go into what makes good logic, what makes good reasoning. And the way that they tell that is through writing. So that's how I formulated my question.
That's a really great response. I think it touches on a few different pieces that maybe people don't immediately think about. Like maybe I have to start looking at other people's research first instead of just thinking about mine right now. Look at what's out there and maybe look at what you think a research project is missing or how you can contribute to it. That's a great way to start. Mentorship is also a great tip there. I think everyone always usually benefits from a mentor. But you also took something that was like a passion of yours, which was like linguistics and journalism, and tied it into your data science experience, which I always think is a really nice thing to do. Liam, do you have anything to add to that? You're next on my screen.
I think similarly, yeah, definitely think about questions and problems in the world you're deeply interested in, have passion for. And read papers in the field to spark some inspiration, find some measures to track, or some metrics rather. And yeah, go from there. The ways to answer questions will start to build themselves up in your brain. And don't be afraid to ask other people, say on LinkedIn, or professors in the statistics department at your college, stuff like that, because there's plenty of techniques you may not know about. For example, the single topic LDA we used in ours was brought to our attention by our professor. And yeah, definitely ask around and pursue what makes you interested.
Great. So far, passion is definitely a theme here. And I also think that's important. I feel like a lot of people, especially as they come into the field, they're like scared to reach out to people. It might be a little nerve-wracking. Even as I was coming to the field, I was like, why would anyone want to give me information? That feeling comes on, and people are so nice. LinkedIn is a great tool if you see someone's research out there that you're really interested in and you want to ask questions about it. I think sending that message on LinkedIn and trying to get those answers is a great place to start also. Monica, you're next on my screen. Do you want to mention how you came up with your research question?
Sure. So as I previously explained, I worked with data from Dr. Jamie Banks' study. One thing that helped me a lot throughout like the process of coming up with like a specific question was definitely looking into like past research regarding how people perceive social robots. And I basically like I'm a psychology student, so I'm really interested in the topic of like cognitive frameworks, heuristics. So that was definitely something that I was looking for in Dr. Jamie Banks' data.
That's great. We have a lot of people in our community who are always saying, I'm not in data science, but I'm using so much data. And a lot of people are actually in the psychology field, sociology. A lot of people are in bio, those sort of scientific fields. So many more people than just like data science students are using data every single day. So that's a great point also. Kiana, you're next on my screen. Would you mind adding to that?
Yes, I'd say it's a mix of your interests and also like your skills and what you're capable of. Um, and I would also say, like, specifically for me, since I had to search for the data, if the data doesn't exist and you have no way to generate it, then of course you're not gonna be able to do that project yet. So those were the main things for me. And then also just looking into previous research, that's how I was able to refine and figure out exactly where I wanted to go. Especially if you get stuck. I noticed if I get stuck, start reading more papers, and then it starts piecing itself together.
That's great too. So I feel like maybe people who are they sit down and want like a research question maybe in 10 minutes, and then they get maybe overwhelmed or discouraged that they're not immediately having that light bulb moment of their research question, maybe to be patient, look through more resources, and kind of wait for that puzzle piece moment where other resources are kind of like gluing themselves together, and maybe they'll have that moment moment after a little while of looking through some additional resources. Lily, do you want to talk about how you came about your research topic?
Sure. The three of us were pretty broadly interested in maternal health, and we started doing a very broad literature review and finally settled on the topic of maternal hypertension first. And then we were looking at different health outcomes associated with maternal hypertension. And we wanted to make that link between maternal and infant health. And so that's where we ended up with postneonatal SIDS.
Very interesting. Yeah, there's a lot of themes going across the board here. I feel like a lot of students are going to learn from this conversation, absolutely. And I just want to give Putra Negara another a moment to add his thoughts as well, of how you came about your research topic.
Yeah, actually, I got my research question from the presentation of my Minister of Health. And when I was still studying at Boston University, my Minister of Health was presenting at Harvard University, and he said that we need to make documentations on how our response actually during the COVID pandemic, so that the future government, should the pandemic happen again, don't have to start from zero and then something like that. And then that's where the questions pop up in my mind. How can I contribute to that kind of question? Like how are the other countries are doing? How are the conditions? What are the responses? And that kind of curiosity wants me to contribute to the kind of the efforts in the endeavor of my government to kind of make documentation on how to deal with the future pandemic. So that's the trigger of my research question, I think, so far.
Very interesting. Yeah, especially even in the transportation data science project, we encourage people to kind of dive into the data in their own areas. Sometimes it connects it more when it's something that's closer to you or something that you're more interested in. I definitely see Florence thinking, so I want to give her a chance to chime in here. Florence, any thoughts or questions? Oh, you're on mute.
Always. I love thinking, and thank you all for making me think. And thank you for making everybody think. And, Lauren, Emily, Aditya, you all did such a wonderful job today. I'm thinking a couple of things. One is I expect to see you presenting for years into the future, all of the students who presented today. I think you're going to be very successful. I'm so impressed with how you give yourself the liberty of finding the right question, trying to find the right data. Kiana, as you said, you might realize there isn't data on that, so you can't do it yet. Yet is a great answer, or a great word to use. When someone says, do you know blankety blank? I rarely say no. I usually say not yet. right? Because there's always an opportunity to learn more or to meet people. So I love the way you all talked about taking the journey, for research. Where do I start? What do I think? What makes me impassioned? Putra Nagata, like you were saying, you were listening to the health minister. How inspiring is that for your country, right? And one comment he makes spawned this work, which is wonderful. So listening to all of you, I'm just so inspired by what you've done. And I was actually imagining you 20 or 30 years from now, or I'm going to be watching you from some stage somewhere. I don't know where yet. Maybe it'll be you're a Nobel laureate. Who knows? Dream big, and I'm just so inspired by all the work that was done and your thoughtfulness in answering questions too, and being confident enough to say, well, I don't know the answer to that one. That's very important to do, to stay fact-based. Don't make it up, right? Especially in science. And so I'm just so impressed with all the great work you've done, the way you represented yourself and your work and your teams. So they're making me think so many cool things, and how much additional value you can add into the future. This pandemic is not over yet. I hate to break it to you. I think we know that. It'll be going on forever in different ways, probably, maybe linking up with other ones, which would be terrible, but that could happen. I was just reading about how the measles is back. Oh, wonderful. So people need to get vaccinated if they've never been vaccinated before, but they might not want to. So, some of the comments about, that Liam was making, what would put people over the line, like what would make them want to, what's the risk reward analysis people are taking, what perspective are they taking, and how can we improve health outcomes? How can we help them see what might be able to help them live a longer and better life? So there's so much positive that can come out of everything you're already doing, and I can't wait to see the cool things you do in the future. So that's what I was thinking, Emily, and that little, you always see me thinking, right? That's what I was thinking.
Well, I'm glad I asked. I completely agree with you, which leads me to this slide here. I just want to thank all of the team here. We all want to thank you for the inspiring research that you've done. Thank you for taking part in all of the Hub's programs, challenges, and initiatives over the past year, and joining today to share all of your learnings and your expertise on these topics. We truly all have learned so much from all of you, and we're so grateful that we get to put a spotlight on the student research that's being accomplished around the country and around the world. So I'd also like to give a shout out and a thank you to my co-moderators and facilitators today, Aditya, Florence, and Lauren, for all of the efforts put into today's event. You all have helped me make the show go on, so I really appreciate all of your efforts. And as we are coming to a close, here's a quick reminder of how to connect with us. You can join our mailing list to receive updates and news about new events, programs, challenges, and more, including those 2024 versions of the NSDC Data Science Symposium and Kick Student Paper Challenge. Follow us on social media, including LinkedIn, Twitter, and Instagram. And also our YouTube channel. You could subscribe there to keep up with us and a lot of our new content. And you can join our Slack channel to find an interactive and collaborative network of data science learners, mentors, researchers, and other data enthusiasts. And of course, if you have any questions, you can always email us at the email at the bottom of the screen. So I really enjoyed myself today. I hope you all enjoyed it just as much. And I just want to pass it over to Florence for any final words to close the event.
Well, Emily, we have to thank you because you pulled this all together. So thank you so much for your patient persistence and your thoughtful approach to collaborating with everybody and leading us to a great result. So thank you for that. Thank you to Lauren, who's kind of the human behind the curtain today. She's doing our live stream for us and she helps us with all of our communications and operations. And Adita for being one of our Columbia University grad student part-time workers at the hub. It was wonderful to have you facilitate the Q&A. Great job. And we love to give all of you out there the opportunity to volunteer volunteer with us to help in different ways, recording videos and other things. So that REAL program that Emily talked about stands for Research Experience and Leadership Opportunities. So you can go to that webpage and see all those different opportunities and feel free to engage with us. So on that note, I think we're right on time, and it was really a wonderful event. We plan on putting this on YouTube. We're hoping to also break up the separate presentations by each researcher so that people could look for you. And we do that with our COVID Information Commons researchers. So we're looking to do something similar with these as well. So hopefully you'll see that in the future. And if there's anything else we can do, please let us know. And everyone be well, stay safe, and I can't wait to see you at the next event.
Thank you all. Take care.
Bye-bye.
Thanks for joining.
Thank you.